I landed around 6:30, still jet-lagged, still half in Singapore. I turned my phone on. One text lit up the screen. It was from Gavin, just 5 words. "Don't come home. It's over." I stood there, right in front of the baggage carousel, frozen. People walked past, some hugging, some smiling. I had no one, no ride, no explanation, just silence, and a cold draft that slipped down my collar. Have you ever come home and realized there's no home waiting? Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And hey, don't forget to hit subscribe. You'll want to hear this one. 3 weeks ago, I was standing in our kitchen stuffing power converters into my carry-on. Gavin leaned against the counter with his coffee, not even pretending to help. "You packed Emery's dance shoes, right?" I asked, closing the zipper. He didn't answer right away. "Then yeah, I think so. Check the blue tote." I paused. That tote was in the attic. I looked at him. He didn't look up from his phone. That should have been a sign. But I let it go. Gavin had been distant for months, brushing things off like he was just stressed. Always a new project, always client calls. And I wanted to believe it. Because I loved him. Because I needed this trip to mean something. Not just for me, but for us. Singapore's a big deal, my boss had said. It shows they trust you. And I needed that. I'd turned down 2 other offers before. One in Boston, one in London. All because Gavin said it wasn't a good time. Because Emery needed me home. Because it's not about the money, Sierra. It's about stability. But when this one came up, I didn't ask for his opinion. I just said yes. I thought if I could prove I could lead an international deal, maybe things would shift. Maybe he'd see me again. Not just as the person who packed lunches and signed permission slips, but as a woman who still had ambition. He barely looked up the morning I left. Didn't even walk me to the car. Emery did, though. She ran outside barefoot, clutching her stuffed fox. "Don't forget to call every night," she said. My heart cracked a little. "I won't, I promised." I kissed her forehead and waved as my rideshare pulled away. That was the last moment that felt normal. The next 3 weeks were a blur of meetings, late-night noodles, and over-air-conditioned hotel rooms. We spoke less and less. Our calls got shorter. "Everything okay?" I asked once halfway through week 2. "Yeah," he said, "just busy." There was a pause. Then the line cut out. I stared at my screen for a long time. The next night, he didn't pick up. No explanation, no follow-up. But I made excuses. Maybe he was tired. Maybe Emery had a school thing. Maybe the Wi-Fi was acting up. I was so damn good at giving him grace, even when I was running on 5 hours of sleep and 6 cups of coffee. Even when my heart knew something was wrong. But I smiled through the pitch meetings. I stayed late. I closed the deal. And I booked my flight home with a quiet kind of hope. The kind that you whisper to yourself when you're afraid it'll fall apart. "I just need to see them," I told the woman next to me on the plane. She smiled, didn't say anything, but her eyes softened. I wonder now if she knew, if some part of her recognized the storm I was walking into. Because deep down, I think some part of me did too. By the time I got to Everhurst, it was almost midnight. The cab pulled up to our driveway like it always had, except nothing felt the same. No porch light, no sign of movement. I dragged my suitcase across the gravel. The wheels made that uneven rattle. The sound echoed louder than it should have. I reached the door, punched in the code. Red light. I tried again, slower this time, thinking maybe my fingers were just tired. Red light. I froze. Same code we'd used for 6 years, the date we got married. I wiped my hands on my jeans, tried once more. Still locked out. My throat tightened. I knocked soft at first, then harder. "Gavin," I called. "Emery, baby, it's Mom." Silence. Just the sound of wind brushing past the hedges. I stepped back and looked at the windows, all dark. Maybe they were sleeping. Maybe Gavin was just trying to prove a point. But Emery? She would have run to the door. Unless she wasn't there. My stomach turned. I pulled out my phone, called Gavin. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. Then I noticed it. The little blocked message under his name. He'd blocked me. I stood there in the cold suitcase at my feet with nowhere to go. Even the street felt quieter than usual. No passing cars, no lights in the neighbors' windows. Just me, and the realization sinking in. I wasn't welcome here anymore. I didn't even know where my daughter was, or who she was sleeping next to. A motion light flicked on from the Parkers' house across the street. Their dog barked once, then silence again. No one opened their door. No one asked if I was okay. I sat down on the porch steps, still holding my phone like it might change something. Like maybe if I stared long enough, it'd all make sense. But it didn't. All I could think was he planned this. He changed the locks, blocked my number, took my child, and waited for me to find out. Like this. I spent that night in a roadside motel, peeling wallpaper, flickering lamp. The kind of place that smells like mildew and disappointment. I didn't sleep, just stared at the ceiling fan as it clicked with every rotation. Around 6 a.m., I called my old lawyer, Melissa Kearns. We'd worked with her on the house refi. She answered on the second ring. Sierra. Melissa, I think Gavin filed for something. I need help. A pause. Then she sighed. I'm sorry. Gavin reached out last week. I can't represent you. Conflict of interest. My mouth went dry. He'd planned for this too. Filed early, covered his bases. Of course he had. I hung up without another word. For the first time in years, I didn't know what to do next. I scrolled through my contacts, fingers numb. Then I remembered Kara from work. Her divorce had been brutal, but she won full custody. I sent her a message. Do you still have your lawyer's info? I need someone today. She replied in minutes. Carmen Holbrook. She doesn't mess around. Downtown Portland. Call now. I did. Receptionist answered with clinical efficiency. I barely got through my name before she said, Ms. Holbrook has a cancellation at 11:00. Can you make it? I'm already in the car, I lied. And by 10:45, I was sitting in a glass-walled office that smelled like eucalyptus and control. Carmen Holbrook was tall, sharp-voiced, not one for warm smiles. She gestured for me to sit. I read your intake form. Start from the beginning. I told her everything. The trip, the text, the door, the blocked number. Her face didn't move. When I finished, she leaned back. So, he locked you out, blocked your number, and kept your daughter. All while you were overseas on a company assignment. I nodded. She tapped her pen once. That's not just cold. That's strategic. My heart dropped. He filed already, didn't he? Most likely. Prepped accounts probably lined up a narrative with his counsel. But that gives us a starting point. She opened her laptop. First, we freeze movement. I'll file a petition this afternoon to request temporary restraint on marital assets. You still have access to any joint accounts. I shook my head. They're empty. I checked this morning. My name's still on them, but there's nothing left. She didn't flinch. That's fine. If he moved money without disclosure, that's traceable. And very, very stupid. I blinked. She looked at me squarely. You're not out of options, Sierra. You're just late to the battlefield. But I don't lose wars. By Thursday morning, Carmen had everything spread out on her desk. Bank statements, property transfers, a printout of a real estate deed with a name I didn't recognize at first. Layla Vance, his assistant Carmen said, or ex-assistant. Depends on how long this has been going. The deed was for a house in Lakeview Heights, purchased 2 weeks ago, all cash, $687,000. I stared at the signature. Wait, this isn't our house. No, Carmen said. This is where he moved Emery. My throat tightened. He moved her. Carmen didn't answer. She just slid a printed photo across the desk. It was pulled from Layla's Instagram. Private account, but Carmen had ways. In the picture, Emery, sitting on a granite countertop, wearing pajamas I didn't recognize. She was laughing, her arms wrapped around Layla's waist. The caption read, Pancake mornings with my favorite girl, blended family, grateful. Hi, Barhis. My hand shook. I hadn't seen Emery in 9 days. 9. And this woman, this stranger, was tucking her into bed, feeding her pancakes, taking pictures like she'd earned the right. She's calling her favorite, I whispered. Carmen's voice cut in. Scroll to the next one. Another post, from a week ago. Movie night with our little Bean, so proud of her schoolwork this week. Saw her stepmom life. Stepmom. My mouth went dry. I called Gavin again, blocked. Then I tried Emery's tablet linked through our family plan. Still rang. But no one picked up. After 4 tries, I left a voice message. Emery, it's Mommy. I miss you, sweetheart. Can you call me back, please? I waited. 10 minutes, then 20. Nothing. I messaged her iPad directly. No read receipts, no reply. Later that evening, Carmen texted me. Found school log in history. Emery's attendance is normal. She's still enrolled at Everhurst Elementary. So she was still here, still breathing the same air, still just a few miles away. But out of reach, Layla had slithered into my spot, in my house, with my child. And Gavin had let her. Worse, he planned it that way. They didn't just take my marriage. They were trying to erase me completely. Friday morning, the email came. Subject line: divorce terms. Response required within 72 HRs. I stared at it for a full minute before opening. Inside was a formal PDF. Header from a firm in Seattle. Mason and Kroll LLP. Representing Gavin Dorne. They weren't even trying to be subtle. The letter outlined his proposal. Full ownership of our current home. Primary custody of Emery, minimal spousal support. No mention of his new purchase with Layla. My hands shook as I scrolled. It read like a business termination, like I was some employee being quietly phased out. At the bottom: we expect your client's signature within 72 hours to avoid escalation. I forwarded the email to Carmen without comment. 5 minutes later, she called. Open a bottle, she said. This is the best news we've had all week. I blinked. What? They just admitted everything in writing, she said. No shared custody offer. No accounting for joint assets. That's a red flag in any judge's eyes. I still felt like I was drowning. Carmen didn't. This is exactly the overreach I hoped for. He's arrogant. He thinks you'll panic and sign. I looked at the clock. It had been 6 days since I'd seen my daughter. 6 days since Gavin stripped everything away. I was done panicking. What do we do next, I asked. We file temporary custody. We issue a discovery demand for all accounts and transfers. And I could hear the smile in her voice. We freeze everything that's still in his name. My heart beat faster. We can do that? We will, Carmen said. And fast. If he wants a war, he just got one. I looked back at the email, his lawyer's tone, his assumptions, his timeline. 72 hours. Fine. He'd have his answer, but not the one he expected. For the first time since I'd landed, I felt steady. Not calm, not okay, but ready. That night I sat on the floor of my rented apartment. No rugs, no couch. Just me and a folding chair I bought from Target. I stared at the framed photo in my lap. Our wedding. Gavin had his arm around me. We looked young, confident, unbreakable. Lies age badly. I traced the glass with my thumb, then flipped the frame face down. The silence in that room, it was different than the silence on Gavin's porch. This one was mine. I pulled out Emery's old drawings, ones I'd packed for the trip. Her stick figures, hearts with mommy scribbled in pink crayon. But none of them looked like the little girl in Layla's kitchen. That Emery wore different pajamas, had different laughter. She was learning how to forget me, and he was teaching her. My breath hitched, just once. Then it steadied. I opened my laptop, typed one line to Carmen. Do everything. Don't hold back. I hit send, closed the photo album, and for the first time since that airport, I didn't feel like something had been taken from me. I felt like I was coming to collect. No more hoping, no more wondering if he'd regret it. This wasn't about Gavin anymore. It was about getting my daughter back, and making damn sure he'd never take anything from me again. Monday morning, Carmen filed everything. Emergency custody motion, discovery demands, asset freeze petitions. The clerk barely blinked. Apparently, we weren't the first war of the week. By noon, Gavin's lawyer had already responded, condescending and smug. Your client is clearly emotionally unstable, the email read. Mr. Dorne has provided a stable home for the minor child, and we expect full cooperation moving forward. Carmen snorted. They're scared. That's panic behind pretty words. We set a meeting for Thursday. His lawyer suggested it. A calm discussion, they said, to avoid court escalation. I agreed. But Carmen was already planning what we'd bring to the table. Let him think we're considering settlement, she said. It'll make the truth sting harder. That night, I sat with my laptop and dug. Emails, receipts, calendar entries Gavin never thought I'd still have access to. Back when we shared everything, including a synced cloud account. He must have forgotten, because there they were, dozens of messages between him and Layla. Some months old, some during my trip. One dated exactly 2 days before I landed. Layla? Are we sure she won't fight for Emery? Gavin, she doesn't have it in her. She'll fold. She always does. My jaw clenched. I forwarded the thread to Carmen. Her reply came quick. Perfect. That's premeditation, control of narrative, strong for family court. The next day I bought a new blouse. Nothing fancy, just enough to look stable, composed. I wore it Thursday morning when we walked into that polished conference room. Gavin was already there. Gray blazer, cuffed sleeves. The same fake smile I'd seen him wear to networking events. He didn't stand, just nodded like this was some business check-in. His lawyer introduced herself, gestured to the table. We appreciate you coming in. It's best when both parties act like adults. I didn't speak. Carmen did. We're here to listen. That's all for now. Gavin's lawyer launched into her pitch. Custody schedules, financial divisions, some offer of bi-weekly visitation if I agreed to stability. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I glanced at Gavin. He looked relaxed, in control, like he'd already won, like the pieces were moving just as he planned. I let him feel that. Let him finish. Let them think this was going to be easy. And then, Carmen slid a folder across the table. In the interest of transparency, she said smoothly, "We've brought documentation of Mr. Dorne's recent financial activity." Gavin's eyes narrowed. Inside were screenshots, bank transfers, emails, Instagram posts, and that one message to Layla, "She'll fold." His lawyer flipped through the pages, her lips tightened. Gavin didn't look so confident anymore. Carmen leaned back. We're still open to discussion, but any agreement moving forward will need to reflect full disclosure and parental integrity. No one spoke for a full 10 seconds. Then Gavin cleared his throat. "This is petty. Sierra, come on. You're dragging this out." I met his eyes, and for the first time I didn't feel small. "No," I said. "I'm just getting started." By Friday afternoon, we had momentum. Carmen had filed subpoenas for Gavin's secondary accounts, one in the name of Orhihar. Red Pine Holdings, a shell company barely disguised. And guess who the listed managing partner was? Layla Vance. Same woman posting pancake selfies with my daughter. Same woman who'd somehow managed to buy a $687,000 home on a preschool teacher's salary. I sat across from Carmen as she flipped through wire transfers. "This one's the key," she said, tapping the page. $140,000 moved out of the joint account on February 11th, while you were in Singapore running a sales floor at 3:00 a.m. I clenched my jaw. That's the same day I missed Emery's school recital. Carmen looked up. "Want to really hurt him?" I nodded. She smiled, tight professional. "Let's notify the school. He moved your daughter without consent. We'll issue a temporary block on any further change in custody until we get a court review." "You can do that." "We already did. Principal should be receiving a copy within the hour." I blinked. "Wow." Carmen raised an eyebrow. "You're still thinking like a wife, Sierra. Start thinking like a mother in a fight. We don't ask permission. We protect." That night, Gavin's lawyer called Carmen directly. I sat beside her listening on speaker. "We need to cool this off," the voice said. "Things are escalating fast. Let's sit down again, rework the terms, privately." Carmen glanced at me. I nodded. She replied, "We're open to that. But we expect full revisions, custody reversal, financial restitution, and an apology for the smear tactics." Long pause. "Then I'll speak to my client." We hung up. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Instead, I stared out the office window. It was dark by then. The city lit up in pieces like the life I used to have. Only now, I was the one flipping the switches. Later that night, Carmen sent a follow-up email. "Please also prepare statements regarding Layla's role in parental interference." I asked her, "Do you really think we'll win full custody?" She paused, then said, "Family court favors patterns. Right now, he's writing you a perfect one." The next morning, I got a text. Not from Gavin. From his lawyer. "Our client is willing to accept shared physical custody on your terms. Please advise if this is acceptable to your side." No demands, no deadlines, no threats. Just desperation. I let Carmen answer. But I wrote my own reply to Gavin. Simple. 2 lines. "Tell Layla she should stop pretending to be someone's mother. The real one just came home." The courtroom wasn't large. Just 3 rows of benches, a judge's bench, and the cold hum of fluorescent lights. But it felt enormous, like every inch held its breath. Gavin sat across from me in a tailored suit, his lawyer whispering in his ear. He didn't look at me, not once. Carmen placed our folders neatly on the table. 1 red tab for each bombshell, and we had plenty. Judge Willis entered stern, gray-bearded no-nonsense. He glanced through the preliminary documents and looked up. "Ms. Holbrook, your side may proceed." Carmen stood like she'd been preparing for this her whole life. "Your Honor," she began, "this is not just a matter of divorce. It's about a mother who returned from overseas to find her child relocated her home, locked, and her marriage erased without process, without consent. and with calculated deception. She handed over the first set of exhibits: email threads, bank statements, photos of Emery in Layla's kitchen. The judge read in silence. Then slowly his brow furrowed. Gavin's lawyer tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, we dispute the interpretation of these transfers." Carmen didn't flinch. And yet the timeline aligns perfectly. February 11th, $140,000 transferred out of the joint account. February 12th, property purchased in the name of Ms. Vance. February 13th. Our client receives a message, "Don't come home." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Dorne, did you inform your wife of these changes?" Gavin's voice cracked. "She was gone. She chose to leave. I did what was best for Emery." "Best," Carmen echoed. "You moved her into a home with your mistress, without notice, and blocked her mother from contact." Layla shifted in her seat behind Gavin. She hadn't been summoned to speak. "But Judge Willis surprised us." "Ms. Vance, would you step forward?" Layla blinked, then walked to the front, arms tight, eyes scanning the floor. "Are you currently acting as a parental figure to the minor child?" the judge asked. I help with homework. I make her breakfast. She calls me her other mom sometimes." "That'll be enough," the judge said. Sierra's heart slammed against her ribs. I wasn't breathing. I could see Emery in my mind, her small arms wrapped around that woman. Her laugh. Her quiet, careful laugh. Carmen leaned toward me, whispered, "Hold steady. This is the part he falls apart." And she was right. The judge turned back to Gavin. "Did you intentionally prevent your daughter from contacting her mother?" Gavin shrugged. "I thought it'd be less confusing." "You thought wrong." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Then it was my turn. Carmen nodded gently. I rose, walked to the front. "My name is Sierra Dorne. I spent 3 weeks overseas representing my company. I video called every night. I checked in. I even brought back gifts." I paused. My hands were trembling, but I didn't stop. When I landed, I found a locked door. No child, no husband, just silence. And a message telling me not to come home. The judge's eyes were on me now. "I haven't just lost a marriage, Your Honor. I've lost time with my daughter, her trust, and maybe parts of her childhood I'll never get back." I swallowed hard, but I'm here now, and I'm not asking to erase Gavin. I'm asking to be restored. Judge Willis leaned back. After a pause that felt like forever, he said, "Effective immediately, the minor child Emery Dorne shall remain in the primary custody of her mother, Ms. Sierra Dorne. All further relocations or household changes must be court-approved." Gavin shifted in his seat, tried to speak. His lawyer held him back, and the judge continued, "Mr. Dorne shall not impede contact between mother and daughter in any form. Failure to comply will result in supervised visitation only." My knees nearly gave out, but I stood firm. Carmen reached out, steadying me with just a touch on the elbow. As we left the courtroom, I saw Layla rush ahead, red-faced lips pressed tight. Gavin stayed behind, still seated like the weight of everything had finally hit him. Outside, the wind felt different. Cool, but no longer cold. And waiting by the courthouse doors was Emery. Carmen had arranged it quietly through my emergency petition. She wore her little green hoodie, clutched her fox toy, eyes unsure until she saw me. Then she ran. No hesitation, no confusion. "Mommy." I dropped to my knees, arms wide, and caught her mid-jump. I don't remember what I said, or if I said anything at all. I just held her, felt her heartbeat, heard her breath. And I knew, this part, this moment, he could never take from me again. It's been 3 months. The apartment we live in now is smaller. 1 bathroom, creaky floors, no marble countertops or backyard swings. But it's ours. Emery paints on the windows with dry erase markers, leaves hearts on the fridge, laughs in her sleep again. She asked about Layla once, just once. I told her the truth, not all of it, but enough. "That wasn't your fault," I said. "None of this was." She nodded, then went back to drawing. Gavin pays court-ordered support now, sends polite emails through his lawyer. He hasn't tried to fight the custody ruling. Layla vanished, no more Instagram posts, no holiday cards. And me, I started consulting part-time. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. And for the first time in years, when I look in the mirror, I don't see someone who gave up too much for someone who gave too little. I see a woman who came back from nothing, with her name, her daughter, and her voice. Forgiveness, I'm not there. Maybe I never will be. But peace, yeah, that part I've earned. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been erased from your own life and had to claw your way back? Where are you listening from tonight? And if you felt this one, Hit that subscribe button because you're not alone and your voice matters too.